Welcome to Tunes and Tales, the podcast where we take a deep dive into the music that moves us and the live shows that changed us. Each episode, we sit down with a special guest to uncover the songs that shaped their world, the albums that defined their life, and their most unforgettable concert experiences. Whether it's their first time seeing their favorite artist or that one song that brings them back to a pivotal moment in their life, we'll explore the stories behind the music and the moments that make it all unforgettable. Get ready to learn a little more about how music influences the individual with me, your host, Anya Stuckert. Today's episode is going to feature an interview with Dr. Hanley, Monmouth University English professor, music fanatic, and member of the 1990s indie Americana band, The Mertens. Stay tuned to learn a little bit more about Dr. Hanley's life and the influential role that music has played in it. First, maybe just tell me a little bit about yourself and your personal history or journey with music.
Okay, so um, I was born in Frankfort, Kentucky, in 1972. My journey with music began when I was 5 years old, and my mother signed me up for piano lessons with a lady named Mrs. Fudge. I had different piano teachers over the years, and when I was 7, they signed me up for guitar lessons. I also sang at church. I grew up in a Baptist church, and I was part of the children's choir, and then the youth choir, and then the sanctuary choir. I was in the band at school. I played saxophone in middle school, although I had to quit being in the band because you weren't allowed to play sports and be in the band at the same time. So I didn't continue with saxophone, but I was in the chorale um, at in high school. And I went on to, take piano and voice lessons in college. I was in the college chorale. I wasn't a music major or minor. I was an English major, but I continued with my music studies. So that's basically where I got my training was through lessons and through church. However, around the time I was maybe in fifth grade or so, our parents had my parents, well, I have a sister, that's why I said our, and, my parents had some friends who came over to the house, and the lady, in the couple, sat down and showed me how to read charts to play songs. So rather than reading the actual sheet music, how to read a lead sheet to where I could play. So my favorite at that time was Billy Joel. I was a big Billy Joel fan in middle school, and I was able to get his song books, play those songs on the piano. I would spend hours just sitting there singing and playing the songs on the piano. I moved on eventually to I changed my allegiances to the Beatles. I was obsessed with the Beatles for a couple of years, and I would play and sing their songs on the guitar and the piano. Um, I would I was in talent shows. I would go perform like 4-H, which is I don't know if they even have that in New Jersey.
Yeah,
4-H
I don't think I'm
talent.
familiar with what that is.
Yeah, it's a it's hard to explain. It's like a school club. It's a little bit like Scouts. It's a little bit like Future Farmers. It's kind of a nature, but for some reason they sponsor talent shows.
Okay, okay, that
So
makes
I often entered the school talent shows. I would play Billy Joel songs or medleys of, they were like some of the dumbest medleys. I did
sense.
Kenny Rogers and the Beach Boys one time. Anyway, I'm gonna turn my air conditioning on. If it makes it hard to hear me because the air is on, let me know. But it's kind
Okay,
of
I
hot.
think it should be fine. It's really the volume's like really good.
Okay, good. So around the time I was in sixth or seventh grade, I started writing songs. And so I had a notebook. Um, I can remember the first song that I ever wrote. I was at my friend's house two doors up, and we were watching on Saturday morning. There was a show called American Bandstand, which was
Yeah, I've
basically,
heard of this.
yeah, they would play hit songs and people would just dance, and sometimes the artist would come on and lip sync the songs. And somebody came on and played a song that was the title of it was Runaway. Now it wasn't the song Runaway that like Run, 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 to do run, that it wasn't like the 1950s song. This was in the 1980s. I don't even know the song, but I got it in my head that I wanted to write a song. So I went home and got out a notebook and wrote my own song called Runaway. I could still play it for you, but I'm not going to. It's pretty embarrassing.
Nice.
Um, it was very simple. It made no sense. It was funny because it had like, too advanced vocabulary in it for a song. Even at that time, I was a big reader too, so I ended up being an English professor, I guess. I remember there was at one point in the song, I rhymed the word hover with lover, which was pretty dumb. Um, but anyway, I'd write songs in that notebook, and I'd basically just play them for my mom, and get her opinion on which ones were good. And then I'd take the very best ones and I'd go play them at talent shows. You
Okay,
know,
yeah, it seems like you're super involved, like in
yeah,
every aspect of like music, like just throughout your
yeah,
entire like childhood, early teens and stuff.
yeah, I was. I was very, it was a big part of my life. Yeah.
Um,
Um,
oh yeah,
yeah, so
but if you
go
want to
ahead.
keep
Of
going, if
course,
you're
I know that you're supposed to be actually participating in the podcast. You got to be the
no,
podcaster has to be in there. So,
yeah, I want to get to like further down the road as well, but it kind of like goes really well with another question that I had for you. So in 2018, there was a New York Times analysis of different Spotify data. I don't know if like you're familiar with Spotify, but it's like a
yeah.
streaming platform. And it showed that the songs that we listened to during our teenage years kind of set our music taste as adults, with age 13 and 14 being the most influential. I know you mentioned like during that time listening to Billy Joel and the Beatles. Do you still
Mhm.
really resonate with that music?
I don't listen to Billy Joel anymore at all. I feel like I kind of outgrew that. Um, so not that I like would look down my nose at people who like Billy Joel, but I don't. That's not the kind of music that I listen to. The Beatles, however, I discovered in eighth grade, and I would maintain, and I think a lot of musicians would maintain that they sort of remain central. Like if you're going to be a songwriter and you're going to play in bands and you're going to, at least in the circles that did, which were sort of indie rock, Americana rock circles, everybody knows the Beatles. And by knows the Beatles, I mean knows every single song of the Beatles and has them imprinted in their souls. Right. So I really don't have to listen to the Beatles anymore, although they're still in my music library, and Billy Joel is not.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's
But I also sort of, they're not the only. But I think you're right that they were kind of the foundation. Although, after about my sophomore, junior year of high school, I discovered REM, which kind of led me down a rabbit hole of college rock and indie rock and more sort of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, hipster
okay.
type of
So
bands.
do you
Right.
kind of think that those were more of the formative years for you in music? And I guess it's different for you because you like were a musician. So I feel like that's different than just being more of a listener, like if you're participating in the music,
I
and
mean,
you
I would say
identified more with that type of music.
I've always felt like for me, the very deepest musical foundation of how I think about music or write music was the Beatles, and but on top of that was sort of, so once I realized that I wanted to be a songwriter, and write my own songs. And I sort of layered on top of that. I always say that, probably the biggest four influences for me after that were Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, Neil Young, and Joni Mitchell. I think they're the best songwriters in the American tradition. Well, Leonard Cohen is up there too, probably. I didn't discover him until later. But I feel like they would be the sort of aspirational songwriter figures. The Beatles were more of a band and a pop culture phenomenon. And they would be more the role models in writing songs. But then, you know, they're also old and classic rock. I was trying to do something newer. So, bands from, REM up through, I'd say, I still discover new bands. Today, I keep up with, I guess, indie rock and hip hop and Americana music. And so there were bands that, like, once my band emerged, this was in the late 90s. I'd say we were often said that we were like highly influenced by REM, but we got compared a lot to bands like Guided by Voices and Pavement, and we got compared, also to just like bands that nobody on earth has ever heard of. One time a newspaper called us like Pete Townsend and Robert Pollard, who's the lead singer of Guided by Voices, meet up at a hillbilly kegger where Guadalcanal Diary is playing. And like, if you've ever heard of Guadalcanal Diary, I would be really shocked. But like, that's like 1990s underground music.
Okay.
I like a lot of those. I like a lot of bands from that era up to the present.
So, how did your band form? Could you like go a little bit deeper into that?
Yeah, we formed out of high school. So my best friend from eighth grade, freshman year on, and his name is Steve Gullett. We're still close friends. We formed a band with my cousin, and we played in his trailer. And like Steve lived in a trailer park. He was kind of working class. I guess we were middle class, but we played over his trailer, and we played Beatles covers and just any Wipeout, Louie Louie, any sort of easy song that we could learn to play. We had an epic cover of Stairway to Heaven that was terrible. It's like if you heard it, you'd really get cracked up. It doesn't sound
Okay.
like Stairway to Heaven. And we wrote our own original songs. Um, at some point, sort of other people wandered in and out of the orbit of that band. And one of the people who wandered in was a guy in our grade whose name was Steve Simpson, who played the guitar. So when I was in, I guess, my junior year of high school, my original guy I played with, Steve Gullett, got invited to go join like the coolest band in Frankfurt. Well, they weren't cool at all. They were old. They just had shows. Like they actually played in bars and, at the county fair and stuff. So he went and joined this
Okay.
actual band. And the other guys and I were left to, sort of form what turned into my actual band, a high school band. So we got left behind by the original drummer, and I formed a band with a guitar player and drummer and another friend of mine. We recruited to play the bass. And we mainly played covers at that time. I guess we always wrote some original songs. But we were playing a lot of REM. So each got to pick cover songs. So it was totally random. Like we played REM, the Beatles, but the other guys in the band really liked Rush. They wanted to play Rush, which is, like prog rock, heavy metal. We played Metallica. I think in the first show that we played, I remember we played one, the Metallica song
Mhm.
the famous Metallica song was in our set. I couldn't sing those songs. We played a lot of Guns N' Roses.
Okay, so kind of like all over the place with the
It
covers.
was. It was all over the map at that time. And that was around, my senior year of high school. We played our first gigs at like a dance. Our first gig was in the church parking lot. Um, that was funny. And then we played like a school dance, and we played at some like teen non-alcohol serving nightclub called Teens in our town that somebody tried to open up. We played talent shows, uh, that kind of thing that you do as a high school band. And we continued throughout college, and we sort of focused our set list a little more to where we eventually were hired to play fraternity parties, proms. This was in the 90s, so the set list would be things like, Nirvana, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Soundgarden,
Okay,
REM,
cool.
all
Does
that kind
you
of
like
stuff.
identify with a lot of that music since like you were playing it a lot or not so much?
I mean, I like that music. I still like Nirvana quite a bit, and some Soundgarden. I'm not really liking the Red Hot Chili Peppers anymore. I tend to like stuff that I like things from that same era that you heard less of. Um,
Yeah, because like you keep referencing like the indie rock scene.
right.
Um, yeah, so like what indie rock bands were you interested in or are you interested in now?
Um, I mean, I'm still interested in them. Although I don't, I mean, our band broke up in 2002. So it's been a long time since, the music I listened to really informed like an active music career. Um, I still write songs and, play with bands. Um, and I still play at church, but, uh, I'm not really taking influence from the bands in a way where, it's, uh, in the same way. What I've been listening to recently is Deerhoof. Um, I have been listening to. I'm a big fan of the Mountain Goats. Went to see them recently. Another major favorite of mine is Destroyer. That's Dan Behar. I like a lot of the bands that are on Merge Records, on Matador Records, Secretly Canadian. And there are bands that we played with and interacted with in our career who are, pretty famous now. In fact, the bassist that played in my band is, I guess, famous. He plays in the band of this country, I guess, trad country or alt country songwriter named Coulter Wall. So he travels around the country playing in his backup band. We were kind of in that. Our band was considered like alternative country or Americana. So we came out in the same era as bands like Wilco, the Drive By Truckers, the Old 97s, those kinds of bands.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, like okay, now I'm getting like more of a feel for the type of music when like
Mm-hmm.
you name some of that stuff. So in another 2018 study by the Cognitive Neuroscience Society, they found that musicians listen to music in a deeper and more complex way, especially when listening to um, music that's like heavily involved in like an instrument that they play. So for example, like when a guitarist listens to a guitar solo, like different parts of their brain will light up when compared to just a normal listener who doesn't play guitar.
Right.
Do you identify with this at all? Do you think that like you listen to music in a deeper way because you've played so many instruments?
Yeah, I've actually had a lot of conversations about this with my son, who is a junior in high school and has just started playing guitar in the past year. And he's noticed I can do tricks, right? Like because of having played in bands and played guitar for so long, like I can listen to a song and I can tell you what key the song is in and pretty much identify the chords that are being played and where they're being played on the guitar immediately. And he's like, "How do you do that?" I'm like, "Well, you just play music for 30 years. It's easy."
Yeah, no,
But
but it's crazy to think that like I don't know, like listening to music in that way, like being able to kind of dissect it, must be like a much different listening experience.
it is, and it makes you like things that other people might not like, for reasons you might perceive. So, for example, I mentioned that I'm really into this band Deerhoof. Now, they sound kind of, I don't know if have you ever heard Deerhoof before?
I have not. I'm gonna check
You
them out though.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised if you listen to them. They sound kind of like Yoko Ono, so they sound like cartoon
Okay.
music and this like, Japanese singer, um, woman singer. It's very odd sounding music. What I really like about it is it has two guitars and the parts that they play are very complex and interlocking. And you can hear, I think what that article is saying is really true on a technical level. Like if I can hear a song and I can tell what key it's in by the voicing of the guitar chords that are used, assuming that the guitar is in standard tuning. Um, you can just sort of hear how it works. Is I don't know how to really explain it, but it's just something you develop over the course of years. And then when you listen to music, you might be very critical about like the tone of the guitar sound, like whether they're getting a good tone with the guitar that they picked and their amplifier. You might be more critical if you're a singer about the phrasing of the vocals and the degree to which it's innovative or derivative. Like for instance, I'm not going to be I'm very rarely interested in any sort of music that I would say falls into the American Idol adjacent categories, because that style of singing is so, I'm not impressed by someone who's really great at singing Hallelujah in exactly the same way as everybody else can sing it, and they can hold their breath longer and hit a note higher. Although, I mean, they might have a wonderful voice, and they might sound great doing that kind of thing. That's just not really what interests me. I kind of like singers who sound unique.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Um, just as like a final question, what would you say your favorite concert experience was, either performing or like attending?
Hmm, that's an interesting question. All right, I'll say one of each. I think my favorite show that I ever performed, and you have to understand that our band, we were kind of following a playbook that, and there's an actual book, like you could buy the book about how to start up your band and go on tour in a van. So we bought this book. It told us, how to, book shows. It gave a list of the clubs in the various towns that you could call to get shows. And we just, we'd send them our demo and get shows, and we traveled around. But as you're traveling around, your audiences are very small, right? Like sometimes you're only playing to 10 people, sometimes it might be 30 or 40 people, but you're just hoping to go in there and play and to catch someone's ear who talks to a lot of other people, right? Because out there are, or there were, I don't know if it's like this with the internet so much anymore, but back then you were looking to, there's this Malcolm Gladwell book called The Tipping Point once that talks about this theory. They're sort of super influencers, right? Who, if you hit some of them and they like you, they go tell a lot of people. They write articles, they tell their friends, oh, this band came to town, they were super cool. And the next time you show up, there are 50 people there. And the next time you show up, there are 100. And that was what you're trying to do back then, because the internet didn't exist, or it
Yeah, yeah,
barely.
it's interesting thinking about like how different that must have been.
Yeah, it was. It was just starting. Um, and I mean, you can almost find no trace of our band on the internet because we sort of predate it. Although, if you want to see the one thing I know that's definitely still on there, if you go to the All Music Guide and you enter the Mertons, Mertons, that was the name of our band. We still have an entry in the All Music Guide, um, which is kind of, that is sort of a litmus test of whether you are a real band or not, whether you're in that.
The
Because
litmus test.
yeah, I don't know. I
Funny.
mean, you have to be somewhat regarded as, putting out real music that, you're not just self-releasing things. So anyway, we have a review in there. You can read our record review from 1999, I guess. But we played a show once in Athens, Georgia, at this club called the Hi Hat. And I'd say there were no more than 20 or 30 people in the club, but there were two or three people in the club who were really important people in that town's music scene, like, a writer for the local music newspaper, a woman who worked with bands and booked them and kind of promoted them. And then the guy who ran the soundboard's name was Patterson Hood. Patterson Hood was the lead singer. He just put out an album of this band called the Drive-By Truckers, which after we left, so we did our show. It was a really good show. It was one of the best shows we had played to almost nobody. I don't know why. We had this, we would play a show to a room of 10 people like it had 10,000 people in it. All right.
That's great, though.
To
That's
make them
great.
feel like they were there. And Patterson Hood watched our show, and afterwards he told the woman who was the promoter, who we stayed in touch with a little bit, he said watching that show showed me that that's what I want to do with my band, the Drive-By Truckers. Right? He's like, I saw that that's what we needed to do, and he did. He formed a different band so that they could start being more like us. And they went on to be super successful. In fact, that's the band that Jason Isbell came out of, and he's super famous songwriter, maybe like the most popular guy right now. I think he's like playing at the Count Basie. So anyway, that show I'm kind of proud of. I mean, there are certain people around the country that we met that went on to have careers or were in the scene that took us seriously as influences or as peers. That was fun. My favorite show that I've been to, I don't know, it's hard to say, but I've said recently that one of my favorites that I've gone to recently is I went to see Deerhoof at Asbury Lanes. There were about maybe 100 people there, but I was on the front row and getting to watch that band play live. I was just really blown away by the musicianship and the energy that they bring. It was super cool.
Yeah,
So
smaller venues I feel like are like some of the best concert experiences. Like I intern at the Stone Pony, and it's
yeah,
like the capacity is like 850, 900 inside, but usually it's not even at that amount. And
right.
I think that it's awesome when everyone has a great view and like
Mhm.
everyone's kind of having the same experience. Like I think that that really adds a lot to it compared to like obviously there's positive stuff to be said about like an arena, but I think it's a lot easier to like reach every single person in the room. Like, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is different. Um, there comes a point in an arena where it gets so big that it is really hard to make it feel communal in the way that it does at some place like the Stone Pony. I mean, like Bruce can pretty much still do it, but I don't know. I mean, like the last two Bruce shows I went to, I was on the very last row in the top, and they're not the same. He's
Yeah.
doing his best. Like he's working hard. I appreciate that he's trying to make me feel like he's involved, but I can only see him on the screen and he's like a tiny speck,
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's crazy.
you know.
All
So,
right. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview. It was so cool to like learn about your journey with music and everything.
all right,
And
you're
yeah,
welcome.
just thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in to episode 2 of the Tunes and Tales podcast. We got to learn a lot about Dr. Hanley's life and his journey with music. Yeah, I'll catch you next time on Tunes and Tales.